We're trying to survive, not knowing the end result of this. Will there be even the opportunity to continue?
You know, water is so valuable, you don't want to waste any of it. We have to be in the ground as soon as the weather turns so we can get out of the ground as soon as the weather is about to turn.
You're installing drip for a single season. You know, that's obviously a huge cost you're putting in.
The technology wasn't quite there.
How can we do this better? What can we do better for next year? Taking notes, learning from ourselves.
That's probably the difference between making something economically viable or not.
In agriculture, you face a lot of challenges. We have global markets now, soaring costs with inflation, energy costs, fuel costs, labor, weather, things we can't control. But I don't know if we've faced any greater one than right now with water adjudication. The state of Washington is suing 30,000 people and putting us into a court case that will last decades, cost hundreds of millions of dollars, and then the end result will be there is no additional solutions. There is no more water for farms or salmon. In fact, at the end of it, we don't even know if there'll be farms left or salmon left to recover.
We're in an area where there's a lot of competing demands for water resources. You know, I always say that we get way more water than we want it in the winter when we don't have much use for it. And then we don't get as much as we need in the summer when all our crops are growing. You know, in my own research, when we haven't irrigated potatoes, for example, we've seen a 20% yield decrease, which, you know, may or may not sound like a lot to you, but that's probably the difference between making something economically viable or not.
Whatcom County is an ideal place for seed potatoes. With the ocean to the west, the mountains to the east, it's just a great place to farm. We have a very moderate climate, some of the best soils in the world, and an abundance of water. So it just makes for a great place to live and farm.
It's a lot of fun. I really enjoy working with Greg. He is very innovative, very smart, very charismatic. He comes across with some crazy ideas that are perceived as crazy at first, and my first response is usually, well, I want to say no, but you can't say no. You always got to say yes. So you say, okay, we'll figure it out, you know, and then we talk as a team and come up with ideas on how we're going to implement some of the ideas that he has, for sure. So. About 3 years ago, we did a little trial with multiple different drip application timings and also where we placed the tape in the hill, and got the data from the yields and the quality on that, and brought it to Greg, and I show him the numbers and stuff like that, and he's like, well, that's pretty cool. Let's try 100 acres. So this would have been 2 years ago. I was like, all right, 100 acres, let's go for it. So we did it out on Highway 9, and we actually had really good yields, some of the best quality we've ever had. And so he was sold, you know, right away. And the next year he says, we need to do half the farm in drip. I was like, what? Half the farm? All right, let's do it. I mean, I'm all for it. You know, that's a lot of investment, but we sold ourselves on it with the quality and yields that we were seeing with it, for sure.
Farmers are constantly experimenting. They're constantly trying new things. As an applied researcher, I think one of the most important things we can do is build those relationships with farmers, because we really want to try and help provide potential solutions to farmers. Obviously, they're going to have to figure out what works economically for their operation, but the more tools we can have in our toolkit, I think the better we will be off.
I'm very proud of what we do and how we do it, and I know we are the most compatible land use for wildlife and salmon to thrive. We can provide those buffers, we can keep our water clean. It's important to our farm that we minimize our impacts. We want to coexist, and drip irrigation is a big piece of allowing us to have the least amount of impacts and play our part in conserving water, conserving these resources for others. Potatoes are pretty amazing. They're very prolific. When we plant one potato, we'll usually produce tenfold. We start with potatoes in a test tube that we multiply out several generations to produce the crop that we actually sell.
Planting season kind of sneaks up on you every year. We work in a really limited season. We're dealing with a lot of rain from October to April. We have to be in the ground as soon as the weather turns, so we can get out of the ground as soon as the weather's about to turn. So we had to figure out how we were going to get all of these acres installed in an efficient manner. So that's why we went down and invested in some new equipment. We were constantly making adjustments the entire season of, how can we do this better? What can we do better for next year? Taking notes, learning from ourselves as the season went on.
We recently purchased a new drip tape application equipment, and the tape's going in very precisely. We're putting in one tape for 2 rows. We, in the past, had put a drip tape in each row, and we found we were getting the potatoes too wet right around the emitters. And this method seems to be working really well, and we're using half as much drip tape. We're pretty excited about the results in improving our yield, improving our quality through having better uniformity versus overhead irrigation.
Irrigation in our area, northwestern Washington, is pretty different than a lot of areas because of crop rotations that are really important for, breaking disease cycles, for building soil health, for having a more productive farming operation. That means that, some fields might need to be irrigated for one crop, but not for another crop. So farmers, in a lot of cases, have evolved to use mobile irrigation systems that might move from field to field. So it's a really interesting system that's evolved.
With seed potatoes, we're producing a very high value crop, and to leave that to the hope that we're going to get rain and produce a crop just isn't really an option. So we're committed to irrigating. In the past, that's been overhead irrigation, and I've always been frustrated with that. It's very labor intensive. It takes a lot of energy, a lot of water, and it doesn't do a very good job.
So in potatoes, because of that annual crop rotation, they've really been utilizing these mobile irrigation systems, which gets the water on the field, allows them the flexibility to move it around to different fields, but it does have disadvantages. It requires a fairly high pressure to operate. You're also throwing water, hundreds of feet up in the air to try and get that coverage from a single source. And so in that process, you're realistically losing a lot of water. And so that's really important if we think about wanting to keep as much water in our system as possible, in our surface water, in our groundwater, and in our soil, because our soil is a huge store of soil moisture that the crops can utilize.
We've been working with drip irrigation for about 10 years, and we've always felt that it could be a key component of raising the best quality crop, the highest yielding crop with the least amount of water. Early on, we've struggled. The technology wasn't quite there, and we've had some real breakthroughs in the last few years. Drip irrigation is a very precise way to irrigate. You're only putting the water in the root zone where the plant needs it. You're not wetting the foliage. And the efficiency is actually 95%. 95% of the water that you've pumped gets to the target where you need it to be.
To me, it was really exciting to see a farm that was trying to really push the envelope, whether it's, protecting our soils, protecting our water resources. It's always really exciting to see when farmers are trying to push the envelope and figure out a system that works both for environmental stewardship, but also, can work in their operations logistically and financially. If you're installing drip for a single season, that's obviously a huge cost you're putting in. It's been a slow and intentional process, but I think they've really gotten to a point where they've made it work very successfully, improve their nutrient use efficiency, reduce their water use, and because of that, be able to justify the costs associated with the drip installations.
We're getting good moisture right around the tape, obviously. Gravity will want to pull the moisture down, but capillary action in the soil will pull the water out, and you can see it's moving out quite well to the width of the bed. See, there's good moisture and a lot of root mass. Really healthy looking plant. Up until this past week, we had almost 2 months without any rain, and the drip tape's been very valuable during that period to keep very uniform moisture. The crop looks good. I think we should expect better than average yields.
So there's a huge environmental benefit to being drip irrigation. We're using a lot less water. We're probably using half to 2/3 of the water that we would normally be using with overhead irrigation. And that's because we're watering so much more efficiently. Water is so valuable, you don't want to waste any of it. So everybody on our farm is very excited about it as well. It's a good feeling knowing you're doing the best you can for the environment.
I'm just checking the field for size. We're getting close to harvest, and to get the field ready for harvest, we'll defoliate the vines. I'd say we're just a matter of a few days away from that, starting that process. So we'll shut the water off and look forward to a good crop. Once the crop has matured, we need to remove the drip irrigation because it would conflict with our harvest. So the vines are shredded, and we lift the tape out of the soil on top of the ground, and then we have equipment that reels up the drip irrigation.
Things looked really, really good this year. We had good yields and good quality. You never really know what you're gonna get until it's coming through the harvest line, and then you're doing inventory, and our drip fields were very noticeably different than our overhead on the same variety, same soil type, etc. Drip irrigation is definitely gonna be tied to our success in the future. There's no doubt about that.
when you're working at very tight margins, trying to survive and not knowing the end result of this, will there be even the opportunity to continue? It's very unsettling to be put in that position. And to have our own state government threatening that is very puzzling, frustrating to me. I think we need some changes legislatively to outdated water laws to do what's best for the community and the environment. I think there's some circumstances where we've seen communities that have lost agriculture just all the way down the I-5 corridor. And I'm afraid that's what's happening to Whatcom County. We'll have unplanned growth. Agriculture will shrink to the point that it's not viable and it will leave. And to me, that will be a tremendous loss. The reason I feel it's so important to protect agriculture is all the things it brings to our community. You know, there's the beautiful open space, the habitat it provides for wildlife and salmon to thrive. There's the obvious economic impacts. We bring in hundreds of millions of dollars from outside our community to our community. We employ thousands of people. So I think it's very important that we do everything we can to preserve agriculture in Whatcom County, and I'm very much committed to that.
One of the things that I love about where I live in Northwestern Washington, just on a personal note, is I love how integrated our agricultural community is and how I can see that in so many aspects. You know, whether I'm at the grocery store and I'm seeing, you know, potatoes that are grown by a farmer I just saw earlier that week, or, you know, whether I'm driving around this complex landscape that involves all this land trading between different farmers. And so I think that's really created a strong community. Having that viable agricultural system is really important for keeping an open land base that people really, time after time, have said they value, both for the health of our, you know, communities and for having a strong food system where we can, you know, be producing things locally and have that resilience that I think is really important to us.
I care deeply about our community. I was born and raised here. I have a business that helps employ people. They're not just employees, they're my friends. I care about them. As third generation farmer, I know, previous generations preserved this farm for me, and my time that I farm the land is finite, and there will be another time, hopefully another generation. We need to do everything possible to take care of the land and pass it off in a better condition than we got it. I take that responsibility. Is very meaningful to me, that what we do leaves our land, our community in a better place than I got it.